My first husband was a United Methodist pastor, and we discerned that call together. And so from the time I was 19 years old, I was a preacher's wife, even before we finished college together. And so he died suddenly of a heart attack after 23 years of ministry together. And so, or marriage and ministry together, suddenly of a heart attack, and was gone from us. And our 5 sons and I moved back to our hometown of Jennings, Louisiana. We were childhood sweethearts, Doug Foreman and I, before we went off to college together. And so we both had family back in our hometown. So that was my default. And the boys and I moved to Jennings. I got a job teaching, as I had in Winsboro. I got another job teaching. And as we grieved and tried to figure out how to go on, without him, those first few years, I took advantage of every opportunity to grow closer to God, because I felt like I needed that now more than ever. I couldn't lean on Doug's relationship with God, as if you ever can, but still, who was I by myself, and who was I without him? And that was a big time of discernment anyway for me, as I grieved, and the boys and I, as we tried to move closer. But I took every advantage to grow closer to God. That first year, I joined a group of, signed up for Disciple One Bible study, where I went through the whole Bible with 11 other people. It was a rich, wonderful time to do that. I signed up to go as a pilgrim for the Louisiana Methodist Curcio. I began Track 1 spiritual leadership retreats with Carol Cotton Wynn. Whatever came across that I thought could help, I really was pursuing God and finding out who I was and who I was in God. I began seeing Margaret Johnson for spiritual direction, and that was a rich time and very, very helpful. First time I'd ever done that. But I was trying to answer the big question of who was I? If I wasn't a preacher's wife, who was I, and what was my place in the church, and what did God want me to do now? And so after about 2.5 years, a new job came across that I applied for, and that was to be district missioner in the Louisiana Conference. It was a new position that was opening up, and I was the first one hired. I was the Lake Charles district missioner. And I took that job, left teaching and took that job. And that gave me a different look at the church. I began the discernment process with my pastor at the time, Reverend Dick Scott Welch, who was so helpful to me. And so it took a while, though, because I really wanted to know what God wanted, not what I wanted, not what other people saw in me, but what did God want? And towards the end of that discernment time, I went to a silent retreat at the Wesley Center. And I finally knew that I was supposed to preach, even though that seemed so unbelievable to me. When I began sharing it with others, it wasn't unbelievable to them. That was another surprise for me. And I never doubted, through 3 years of going away for seminary and all the years of ministry when I came back to Louisiana, I never doubted that call. So I was glad I went through that slow process to get there. Now, if we had lots and lots of time, I could tell you so many stories, because what a rich life being a pastor is. So many stories, so many people, as you walk alongside them in their spiritual life, through hard times and celebrations, so many stories. In fact, I need to reflect more on this, and so it's even harder to narrow it down. But 2 times in my ministry, I felt the weight of the burden of being the pastor, of trying to hold a church together. And they both revolved about buildings. The most recent was at Horseshoe Drive, when we went into the stay-at-home order and the pandemic hit with COVID-19. And how do you keep a church together when you can't meet? You can't meet, your office is closed, no Sunday school classes, no business meetings, no worship together. And so how do you hold a church together? I will never forget the days we lived into that, when I suddenly learned what Facebook Live was. And we orchestrated how to contact people, how to get people to call people and report back. How is everybody doing? But going a few churches back to Love Chapel in Houghton, it was another time, and it was a pivotal moment there for me. We had been there a few years, and I realized the church had been operating with a for sale sign out front for 17 years and hadn't sold. And lo and behold, the realtor retired, and we got a new realtor, and they listed it differently. And suddenly we had offers, and we had multiple offers, and actually sold the church for more than our asking price. So we had to have an all church meeting to make this final decision. They had been looking for that for 17 years. Me, just a couple of years, So I thought it was a done deal, but we sat in the sanctuary for this meeting with the DS, and suddenly everybody started saying, "But my baby was baptized here. I was married here. My grandfather his body was brought here, and he was buried from here. His funeral was here." So everybody started talking about all these holy moments in this sanctuary. And I was thinking, we should have had this meeting in the fellowship hall. But anyway, there we were. And it was such a pivotal moment. I thought, it's going to fall through, because that's the way the young people were talking, and everyone. And then the oldest person there, John T., stood up, a tall man. And I thought, well, we're sunk, because the oldest isn't going to be the one looking forward. He's going to be looking backward, and for sure. And he said, well, my wife and I can't quote him exactly, but this is the essence of what he said. My wife and I are charter members here. All these years of holy moments in this place. And it's a very special place for us, with baptisms, everything. And yet, the church, this building is not the church. We are the church. And all these memories are going to go right with us to our new building. And when we get there, God will bless us with holy moments there too. And so we have to think about where God wants us and what opportunities we'll have there that we won't have if we choose not to move forward. And it was a done deal then. And but the faith of that man and the way the tide turned, and it reminded me of how we have to stand firm when we know where God wants us to be. In both of these stories, I learned the church isn't the building. We are the church. And when we act with God and move forward, that's all there is to it. That's two moments that kind of, for me, were defining moments in my ministry. There's so many people. I moved, thanks to ministry, I moved 22 times in 45 years. And that's a lot of churches. And that's including being a preacher's wife with my first husband. So that's a lot of people I need to thank. And I want to name those names. And I wrote those churches down, not because I could ever forget them, but so that I can name them quickly for this interview. Epps, Old Floyd, Bienville, Strange, Mill Creek, New Columbus, Kentucky, Wilmore, Kentucky twice, Hodge, Dodson, and New Hope, Wesley and DeRitter, Winsboro first, Hammond first, Tallulah first, North Highlands in Shreveport, Love Chapel in Houghton, Louisiana Memorial in Opelousas, and finally Horseshoe Drive that I retired from here in Alexandria. I owe a special thanks to Reverend Dick Scott Welch, Reverend Carol Cotton Wynn, Margaret Johnson, those three I've already named, and all my district superintendents and bishops, of course, that trusted me and appointed me and mentored me in the faith and in ministry. And of course, I want to thank my first husband, Doug Foreman, and the shared ministry that we had together and his love. And my second husband now of 11 years, Christopher Sanders, how he was crazy enough to to marry an itinerant preacher and move with me, leave his job of 20-something years to move with me. And now we get to share this time together in retirement. I thank my parents, Charles and Liz Mack, all my siblings, but especially my sister, Reverend Susan Ferguson, who went with me to seminary later and served as a colleague together with me in the Louisiana Conference. My sons and their wives, Wes and Tammy, Josh and Megan, Matthew and Jessica, Micah and Jill, Tim, and all 10 of my grandchildren, all have supported and encouraged me in my ministry and sacrificed for it. And I hope to spend more time with them in retirement. What are you doing in retirement? And I did allude to the fact that I want to spend a lot more time with family, but I also want to spend more time. My undergraduate degree was in art, and all my life I've pursued art as a way to pray. And so I hope to have an art and prayer ministry. I've set up a art and prayer studio, and, I've done retreats for that. And so I hope to continue that in some vein. I think I will, as God leads.